Well, while I have everybody, hi, this is Joe Marion, President of Cloud Communications Alliance. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start this webinar in just a couple seconds. But while I have your undivided attention, I wanted to use this time to plug the CCA meeting, which is occurring in Almere, Netherlands, June 3rd and 4th. It's going to be great. It's going to be at the Enreach headquarters. And the night before, June 3rd, we're going to all be meeting in Amsterdam at a brewery, having some libation and kind of just enjoying the city. And then the next day, on June 4th, we're going to head into Almere. Almere is about a 30-minute ride from Amsterdam, and that's where Enreach's headquarters are. And that's where we're going to hold the meeting. We have a great agenda. If you go to the Cloud Communications Alliance website, you'll find a link there for the European Summit event. I highly encourage you to come there. We have a limited number of seats, so first come, first serve. So jump on that as soon as you can, please. And Mike and Michael and Mark, I'm going to kind of slowly kick this off, I guess, and Richard will join us. Is that okay with you guys?
Okay for me.
Okay. So everybody, today's webinar focuses on the FCC's ongoing effort to transition U.S. communications networks to an all IP environment. And as legacy networks are phased off and interconnection policy, IP and IP standards, and network interoperability are becoming central issues for service providers. But really importantly, this transition is not just a compliance exercise. We believe it represents a significant opportunity for service providers to enable some new services and to compete more efficiently in an all IP native environment. So understanding the FCC's direction and the emerging standards will be very critical in capturing that opportunity. To walk us through it today, we have Michael Pryor from Brownstein. We have Mark Iannuzzi from Telnet Worldwide. And we should be having Richard Shockley, who's the chairman of the SIP Forum, signing in very quickly. With that, let me kind of turn over to Mark, who's the chairperson of our Government Affairs Committee. He'll give you a little bit more about what we're doing today. Mark, take it away.
Okay, hey, Joe, thanks so much. Let me get some slides going here for us. And hopefully we can see the screen. Can you see the screen okay?
Yep.
You can, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, hey, everybody, once again, Mark Iannuzzi, President of Telnet Worldwide. Telnet is part of the IP phone family of companies. I have also the privilege to serve as your chairman for the CCA's Government Affairs and Regulatory Committee. This topic of carrier interconnection, I'd like to be able to share you some stories from the trenches from my experience, personal experience, and really bringing out two things. One is the business aspect of this, running our businesses, how do we compete? And the other one is really about the what it means to our industry as a whole. So I've been doing this since 1998. So I've had the experience of going in and doing interconnection as a carrier over TDM infrastructure, and the rules and regulations and so forth, I must say, are quite strong and astonishing. And my hope for us as we look to pass the baton to an all IP world is that we can achieve not only that level of capability, but beyond because of the capabilities of IP. So I submit to you that network interconnection is the very fabric of our communications industry. If you can't interconnect your services, you have nothing. And in more than just the thing that drives our businesses, I believe we have a societal duty here. We are leaders in this industry. We are here to ensure the fidelity of our communication networks here domestically and around the world is second to none to meet the challenges of today and into the tomorrow. It's a tall order. It's worthy of our attention and appreciation. So I think what we have dealing with here now, there's some good things, as Joe indicated, that we'll talk to you today about regulatory and legal things, and also in the standards community that are very heartening. And so there's some bright light coming, I believe. So, but in terms of just looking at my own business, there are some value drivers. Okay, we're an evolving business. We're doing TDM, and so what are we trying to accomplish by going to all IP? Well, in an all IP world, take these in different orders. One is just the old value of the economics, the equipment aging out. What kind of what kind of infrastructure are you deploying, and how to keep that to be homogeneous in all IP end to end type of world, and the costs and so forth to take care of that. So what we're seeing here is that not only we're gaining efficiencies of the network equipment, but there's also the cost of exchanging traffic. So we're saving money in terms of how we're able to exchange traffic. That's a big deal. We're always looking for creating value. The other piece here is quality of service. So if I can lower costs and I can increase quality at the same time, well, that's huge. And what we're seeing here is that we're eliminating a lot of things that can cause a lot of nonsense and when you're transiting voice communications. And you're bringing in new capabilities like end-to-end HD high definition codecs that don't exist because they get washed out in the exchange and how things transit today. So being able to lower our costs and increase quality was a huge goal for us. The third piece in terms of what the value drivers that we sought was the integrity, the security of the networks. We all have been dealing with how we introduce more trust into our networks. Well, we now have the ability to really fully take advantage of things like stir shaken, which are an IP native concept. But also, we're exchanging traffic now where I know exactly who, and my peers know exactly who we are. It's coming from a trusted source automatically. So right there and then, these labeling of spam likely and nonsense type of knowing who the carriers are, we've actually kind of had a chance to really mitigate that. And the last piece to talk about here from an operations perspective, when you got troubles going on and people can't make a call, they're trying to call California or someplace, and you're passing it through another provider, and all of a sudden it gets blocked or something's dropping or poor quality. We now have knock to knock type of communications, which is really the type of things we like. So these are the things that we're shooting for. And I can't really disclose right now who the carriers that we're interconnected with. But I'll tell you about how it took to get there. So part of this thing that we're trying to help improve with this engagement with the FCC and these standards community here is that there really isn't any defined process to do this. You really have to just got to hunt and peck. And we started this journey 6, 7 years ago. And so one was just finding the front door. You know, who do you talk to and say, hey, I want to interconnect my network with your network? It's not as simple and as obvious as it might seem to be. There's still a carrier we're trying to get with, and they've been quite difficult to find how we get to the right people there. Now, once you get to the people, there isn't an immediate obligation for these guys to do the exchange of traffic. It's a kind of, if they are feeling it. So you got to be able to have a value proposition that they find compelling in order to exchange traffic. And so it's not a automatic, and maybe it shouldn't necessarily be an automatic, but it should be a little bit more balanced, let's say. And then the hard part goes to choke down. So now you say, hey, I got it. I really like to do it. You like to do it. But the business agreement is a take it or leave it agreement, by and large. There's very little wiggle room. You really, and especially if you're dealing with the major carriers out there, you have really no thing. So that might be the deal killer right there. Whereas in the foundational 1996 Act of Interconnection, this was a mandated requirement. So finding the right people, how you talk to them, how do you actually just navigate with them to get them there where they even agree to it, and then look at an agreement that you got to decide, hey, can you handle that agreement? So the engagement maze. Okay, so then the next thing comes in here is that you start getting, okay, we got the agreement. Now we're going into this thing where we have, I call it, an architectural standoff. So one of the things was going here is that we were ready to go, but then there was obligations in there like, hey, we want to have 100 gig dedicated links connecting your two data centers with our two data centers. And this is like an overkill in spades. And it's like, okay, let's do this over the public internet and let's do it other. So it took years, literally, I think a year before we were able to knock that requirement out of the thing. So the hidden cost in this and this the overall time it just takes to get this through to finish up some of these architectural principles, who meets where, how much you have to, who's paying the freight. And once again, it's this take it or leave it kind of scenario. And it really doesn't bode well for our industry as a whole. The third piece of this thing is that, let's say now we got the architectural figured out, which we did, and we come to agreement after some time. Now you get into interoperability testing. And you want to do good interoperability testing. It makes sense, right? Nobody's denying that. But you have no say in what the interoperability test is. There's this litany of things here, and it's like, why are we going through this labyrinth of things? You know, some of it's good, some of it's not so good. How people are working on it, how motivated they are to get this stuff done. Once again, you have an agreement process here that is it's heavily dependent upon the cooperation of the party that you want to do, especially the big guys out there, because the ball's in their court. And that's where the preponderance of the traffic that you're exchanging from, especially with the cellular guys. So this took another 2 years, literally, to just go through interoperability testing. It sounds crazy, but yeah, it's how it worked for us. Now, with all that kind of, gauntlet thing, hey, we're business people, we're technologists. Okay, hey, we can pull up our britches and get through some of these things here, because the people that we actually were working in the trenches with here, they actually were good people. They wanted to get good things done. But they really had no consequences for any delays or how effective or what kind of distractions were going on. So the good news here today, guys, I just want to let you know that, hey, this is something that we've helped plow a lane going back 7 years ago, and finding out the challenges and making this happen. I believe it is fundamentally important and the opportunity to helping our industry and our society as a whole to really get this stuff right. And I think the good news here is that Michael and Richard will have some things to tell us about it going on at the FCC and within our standards community. And I'll pass the baton from there. So, Michael, how about taking it from here?
Thanks. Joe, do you have your hand up? Do you have something?
I do, but I'm going to try to put it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mark. And I'm Michael Pryor with the Brownstein Law Firm. And I think many of you know me. I've been working with the Alliance for a number of years on FCC regulatory matters. And I thank everyone who's joining us today to talk about these issues. As Mark said, there are tons and tons of benefits to being in an all IP environment. And the interconnection problems, the IP interconnection problems that Mark talked about, his company is not alone. Everybody who's been trying to do this interconnection with the biggest players have had issues with it. So the FCC, I think, finally is getting serious about the IP transition and getting to an end stage where the old legacy TDM networks are finally all retired. And the FCC has a series of interrelated, interlocking proceedings that it has initiated to drive towards an all IP environment. The major proceedings that are ongoing, and we'll talk about a little bit, are how do you do IP interconnection? Does the FCC need to create a set of default rules? Do we need standards? As Mark indicated, unlike the old days of the legacy networks, where you had Congress and the FCC under Section 251 create an entire elaborative framework around what the big companies had to do to physically interconnect with other companies. In the IP world, there are no standards. At best, it's the FCC kind of said, hey, you big guys, everybody, negotiate in good faith if you can and get this going. That has not worked very well at all. So the FCC is taking a look at how to do IP interconnection in the future. A second major part of this is actually intercarrier compensation reform. Believe it or not, there are still some access charges out there, particularly on the originating side, but only if you happen to be running a TDM legacy network. But those access charges might be creating an incentive for some carriers to maintain their TDM networks because it's a revenue source, and that is sort of blocking to some extent this transition. And it's certainly something that the big incumbent carriers have pointed to at the FCC. They've gone to the FCC and said, hey, look, we would really love to do this IP transition, but we've got these carriers out there that come to us and point to the Communications Act and the FCC regulations and say, hey, you big carrier, you've got an obligation to physically interconnect with me so I can send you TDM traffic. And the ILECs say that's causing some problems in converting to IP. The last major set of initiatives that the FCC has going is to really clear the regulatory underbrush to allow the big ILECs to rip out their copper lines and install fiber. So you've got these sort of series of interlocking proceedings going on, and there are sort of secondary consequences to all of this, including a lot of the robocall related items that are currently pending at the FCC, such as branded calling and that sort of thing, that also sort of get mixed up with this. But mostly I want to talk about, for now, IP interconnection and where we are with that proceeding. So the FCC's thinking here, heavily influenced by the big incumbent carriers, is the first thing that the FCC needs to do is eliminate these obligatory interconnection obligations in the legacy world. So by request from the big ILECs, the FCC is contemplating what is called forbearance from the legacy interconnection obligations to be phased in a couple of years. The more interesting thing is the thinking about what does IP interconnection look like going forward. And here it's interesting because the ILECs sort of have the same complaint that Mark raised, which is it's going to take forever to negotiate one-to-one interconnection agreements with hundreds, if not thousands, of small VoIP providers. So they have a proposal that I think might be gaining some traction. And like everything else in the telecom world, there's an acronym for it. It's called ALLY. And what it stands for is Agreementless IP Interconnection over the Public Internet. And Mark sort of alluded to this, but the concept is this: for the smaller providers, to interconnect with others, you need to set up an IP address and put your traffic over the public internet. And that's how this interexchange of traffic is going to work. At the same time, for bigger providers that have enough volume of traffic to warrant direct interconnection, IP interconnection, that will still be available too. But for the most part, the idea is going to be, let's, for the most part, interconnect over the public internet. So how is this going to work? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is, theoretically, is they're going to have to develop some kind of governance structure, sort of like what you see now in Stir Shaken, a governance structure that creates an entity that will bless or authorize providers to exchange traffic over the public internet. In other words, some entity will give all the providers some kind of token or pass to allow them to do this kind of interconnection over the public internet. TBD how that's actually going to work. It'll be interesting to see. The other piece of this is the ILX are asking to have what they call self-help to kick off anybody who's not a good actor. In the old world where there was direct interconnection, physical interconnection, if you didn't like the guy you were interconnected with, you kind of just unplug them. You can't do that if everybody's running over the public internet. So the big ILX have asked for some ability to block or somehow digitally stop what they consider to be bad actors. So that's kind of the overall framework that's being considered here. I will say one aspect of the IP interconnection proceeding that had some people concerned is the FCC said, well, look, if we're going to do IP interconnection, and we know that IP VoIP providers aren't really regulated under Title II of the Act, what's our authority to set up an IP interconnection framework? And they asked, well, do we need to classify VoIP providers as good old-fashioned telecom services providers and all of the regulatory stuff that goes with that? I think that concern seems to be going away. I think the FCC is kind of going to look for other areas of authority to set up some kind of IP interconnection framework that I've been describing. So all of this is going to take time, right? I mean, even if the FCC adopts an order setting out a framework for IP interconnection, there's going to be a transition tail, and that's probably going to be a couple of years. But the ILX have asked that they be, that their physical interconnection obligations be removed by the end of 2028. So that's sort of one deadline that's out there. That's not necessarily the deadline for a full IP transition, but it's one deadline that the FCC is looking to. And in terms of sort of forecasting where the FCC is going to go with this, the FCC has been, I understand, talking with the big ILX, Verizon and AT&T and Lumen on this stuff. I understand they might be holding some workshops over the summer to sort of educate the staff and sort of get input from everybody about how this should all work going forward. Might be a nice opportunity to get someone from the Alliance to be on a panelist on one of those workshops. And then the FCC is contemplating an order on IP interconnection, hopefully by the end of this year, and maybe slipping over a little bit into next year. But I think the hope is to try to get this done by the end of this year. And as with most sort of big ticket items that the FCC has to deal with, I think the FCC is going to kind of hope that there's some sort of industry compromise that they can just implement here. And that's sort of how they've done things over the years. So there are a lot of details in this. Addis has a draft set of standards for interconnection. And here is where we're hoping that Richard Shockey soon shows up, because he was going to provide you some detail about how this interconnection is going to work as it affects how calls are routed over the existing databases, whether it's the LERG or the 800 databases. So whole lot of details that still have to be worked through, even after the FCC says, yeah, this is what we want to have happen. I think that the standard setting process will still be going on in parallel. So maybe what we could do at this point is just sort of pause, because we've thrown a lot out there, and see if there are any questions. about sort of what the process is and where the FCC is going, or what you all have heard yourselves about the ability or difficulties in IP interconnection. So if you have any questions, just let us know.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I can permit you to speak if you'd like.
This is Mark. I could like to make maybe another
Hey,
point here.
Mark, let me interject for 1 second. We do have one raised hand from
Okay, go ahead.
Clark.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Clark.
Yeah, I'm trying to get through all the blockage on my computer.
There you go.
Hear me okay?
We hear you.
Yeah, okay. It's Clark Whitten, Cox Communications. So, I hadn't thought about it until I think it was mentioned, not really in passing, but not fully detailed. How would, we get these orders that come in that say, hey, stop accepting calls from certain midstream providers. How are y'all expecting that would be implemented in the Ally solution? Is there going to be the FCC will be able to tell a central database, hey, take this route out of available options for connecting calls, or what is the anticipated approach of how to fulfill those thou shalt not accept or send calls to certain carriers?
That's a really great question, because obviously what you're referring to is that the FCC, if finds some provider as a bad actor, they will kick them out of the robocall mitigation database, which means you have to block their traffic. And if everything's running over the internet, yeah, I think that's a really great question. It's the kind of issue that that the FCC is going to have to work through. I haven't seen much in the commentary about how to address that question. So everybody, I guess, if you're all working off of unique IP addresses that identify the endpoints of the traffic, maybe you'll have to identify the originating source of that traffic and then associate an IP address with the provider and block that traffic. I don't know, Mark, you have any thoughts on that one?
Am I on there? Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're going to be able to enable here is because you're going to have under the framework of my understanding here, it will not be a obtuse notion here of knowing who the originating provider is. Sometimes it's like, hey, you got to go and decipher exactly who that carrier was or service provider. Within the interconnection framework, is one of the objectives here is to be able to say that there is something either because you as a carrier have decided that this provider should not be putting traffic, maybe your own security criterias have been triggered and you could block or somehow otherwise label those calls. But if the FCC comes down with thou shalt stop, then these same IP addressing structures would be available to us to lock out those IPs.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
A kind of a carrier level blacklist is what you're thinking. It's not going to be like centrally commanded from above that just routes will be pulled out of at least the kind of the architectural diagrams I've seen, and at least from Addis, appear that there'll be a central database that is tracking all of the interconnection routes available. And so you're thinking we would get that order from the FCC and just implement it in our own systems to be able to figure out, don't send calls to or accept calls from this particular carrier.
Right. At the end of the day, it's going to be how you manage your IP traffic flows, and once you know where the good and the bads are, then it allows you to blacklist as may be mandated or prescribed.
Okay, thank you. You can mute me back out.
Thanks, Clark. Luke, I believe you also had a question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We got you.
All right, great. So my question is predominantly on the emergence of AI and AI machines to machines talking to each other and taking the human element out of the conversations and what that might do in this whole IP network interconnect. Is the FCC, or maybe Mark, you can provide a little bit of the interconnect, um, point of view for how AI could potentially start creating some issues in this interconnect world.
Yeah, you know, you can't we can't ignore the impact of AI, obviously. Yeah. I appreciate your question. Um, the precepts of the architecture that I believe help to us to throttle this um, are that when you're exchanging traffic, if the AI was out there as the entity that was generating traffic, uh, in order for it to transmit anything across this communication network, dealing with phone numbers and so forth, it has to ride some network, right? And that network itself would have to then be accountable to the standards that are emerging here. So yeah, it could start to try to do either, in an innocent fashion or maybe a not so innocent fashion in terms of generating traffic. But ultimately, the transmitting and the receiving carrier have to say, all right, hey, what is the traffic that's coming across? And you would know that it's not like the AI can just kind of just jump into the mix and pretend it's a carrier. It had to get anointed to be in this club, so to speak. So I think it's another level of in just creating more robustness in our network because we right now, for example, you don't there's you're just kind of blinded to what's a hop away. You don't really know how that stuff came, and you're relying on things like attestation things, and to me, some of that stuff has some holes in it, and this would look to fortify it out.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Luke. We got a question from Gary Christensen. Gary, you can go ahead when you are ready.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, this is Jerry Christensen. First of all, Michael and Mark, thank you very much. This is awesome. Definitely learning some things I did not know about Ally, for example. I think if you're not watching this thing on a daily basis, things just change so fast. So I think that will probably be welcome to the rural carrier community because I don't know if you guys are looking at the questions in chat, but there's a few of them in there. One of mine, I talked to somebody from the rural carrier community that had concerns about facilities costs on interconnect, that if they connect the way they used to, not using the public internet, that their facilities costs would go up considerably and they have to figure out what POP they're going to interconnect with. But one thing that immediately comes to mind to me is even if we can figure out a way of making the public internet work, how are they going to make sure that there's some level of quality of service that's satisfactory for normal voice, let alone things like 911? I assume that that's perhaps one of the things that they'll figure out as a result of that order on IP connection that you said is probably going to come out. I guess another proceeding, an NPRM that might be coming out that'll cover connection from class 4 to class 5 switches, as well as addressing LEC to LEC interconnection and so forth. Yeah. So anyway, rambling there a bit, but there's a question there. So if you can address that.
So
Well, on the 911 issue, I think there are a couple of different questions in the chat around 911, and 911 has been actually a huge issue in this whole IP interconnection discussion that's going on at the FCC. Because today, most interconnection to the PSAPs, the public answering points, are still TDM connections. And so there's going to have to be some grandfathering going on in terms of maintaining connectivity to the 911 call centers. That there is the process where the call center, the PSAPs are transitioning to next generation 911, which is an IP-based solution. But that progress is going slow. but there's an IP-enabled network. It's the EIS net or something. Anyway, that's going to be set up. But it's an extremely important issue that could create a stumbling block because you need to ensure continuous connectivity to 911, and you can't just rip out TDM trunks if those are needed to feed to the PSAP. So that's a big piece of the puzzle that the FCC will have to work through. And otherwise, how all this works out, I think it's going to be interesting, these workshops that the FCC, I understand, is planning for the summer, because all of these questions, I think, will be kind of, raised and hopefully answered, or at least considered, because there are a lot of moving pieces here. And other issues that some of the CLACs have been worried about is as ILECs become more and more deregulated in all their services, you're seeing huge increases in some of the old DS1, DS3 connections, and even IP connections. So there's some thought about, do we need caps, or at least interim caps on certain ILEC transport and transit rates? So that's another issue that's being raised, will have to be worked through.
Yeah, that's a good one, Michael. Yeah, a follow-up question I had is, do you think there's going to be more IP peering as a result of this? Just your own personal opinion.
Yeah, I think the alley concept, like I said, is sort of simplistic way to think about it is the smaller providers that don't have a ton of traffic will be used as public internet, and I suspect that part of that will have to include service quality standards. If you have enough traffic volume, I think you're going to see still a fair amount of peering or direct interconnection between the larger companies for IP interexchange. The other issue you raised, Jerry, was the rural question. And the big concern that the rural companies have had, I think you alluded to this, with some of the IP interconnection concepts, is if you're going to only have a few points of interconnection, and a small rural carrier has to pay to carry its traffic a long way to the point of interconnection, that's a real problem for the rurals.
Yes.
So this public internet might be actually a resolution that the rural carriers could get behind.
Yeah, I would think so. With one proviso that kind of comes to my mind is, how do you ensure the proper QoS? Because if you go over the public internet, what if the ISP has problems or whatever? So big questions there.
Absolutely.
Hey Jerry, I could add to that conversation. The structural maps that we put together do our IP interconnections with some of these larger carriers is we established a prerogative. We could do it over the public internet or set across dedicated facilities for them. On the dedicated facility side, it's still problematic on that one, in as much as all of the cards are in the other guy's hands in terms of cost sharing now. So where the meet points are, what the size of the pipes are. And so it'd be nice to see a little bit more pragmatics coming into, if we're going to put in dedicated pipes, because the volume of traffic is demands it, or is compelling to do it, then the cost implication should be ultimately de minimis to the parties. Just pick the right places and make sure you got the proper revenue sharing. If you don't hit that threshold, it's like a gating condition. You just all of a sudden blocked everybody out that really wanted to participate. And this is where the public internet comes in, and I think is a stroke of genius in that regard, to make it more ubiquitous. So you still got those 1-2 punch, right? And we got some things to fix up on both of them. So now, in terms of the defects, right, on the dedicated side, we got a cost issue to deal with. And on the public internet side, we got a QoS thing to deal with. Our experience and I think some of this is going to come out. I wish Richard was here to talk about some of the standards things that would be going on. That's about how we address explicitly QoS. Even before the direct interconnection thing of exchanging traffic over public, I submit that most service providers, that's how they're connecting. If you're buying services from Bandwidth or Telecom or somebody, very rarely do you see any dedicated facilities anymore, unless it really demands it. And the QoS hasn't been an obstacle, but it's something not to ignore. So I concur on that.
Yeah, appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry. I believe we have one more question from Maximilian. So Maximilian, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Billy. Thank you, gentlemen, for putting this together. Super informative. I guess I have two questions, both of which are for Michael, I guess. The first is how does this all affect universal service for?
I lost him.
Max, we lost you for a moment. Are you still there?
I think I got the beginning of that question. How does this affect universal service? Think about that. I'm not seeing necessarily any initial impacts on universal service. I guess there might be on the distribution side. There might be some changes to how some of the rural carriers are being compensated, depending on these cost models and what's in those cost models. There might be some impact there. I don't see any impact on the contribution side, which is having to begin.
Okay, but if the tandem interconnection points go away, do LADAs go away? And then how does that affect like who's responsible for carrier of last resort obligations in those areas?
Yeah, well, certainly one of the things that the ILECs are asking for is the elimination of COLR and the elimination of those carrier of last resort. And the other thing they're asking for is preemption of state laws over any of this. So I think the ILECs recognize that shifting to an all IP world, maybe they're just using this as a leverage point to finally get out of their carrier of last resort obligations. But that's an issue that they've raised in the proceeding. And it wouldn't, I could guess, but it wouldn't surprise me if the FCC comes up with a framework, it preempts the states from getting involved in this, which may be a good thing, given some of the things that some of the states have done recently with the VoIP regulation. So does that help?
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Thank you. And then, sorry, one more question is, Cinch kind of commented a proposal of their own of what an all IP future looks like, and it was effectively they would be like the NTP, and they would effectively be kind of the PSTN across the whole country. Have you and I heard that a lot of people, like, there have been few objections to that proposal. Is that something you've read or can comment?
Yeah, I'm not really all that familiar with their proposal or what people have been saying about it, so I probably shouldn't comment on it. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
And then I see we got one from Mark Hennessy in the chat. He asked, do you see there being a requirement for encryption across the public internet?
Well,
they are talking. Oh, so go ahead, Mark.
Well, I wish Richard was here to see what the standards guys are doing, but I think so. Yeah. I mean, that we set up secure it's a public internet connection, but they're going over secure tunnels, so they're encrypted, and that's a mandate thing, and we're very much comfortable with that. So that's how I think that would work as a
I think the
practical matter.
standards, and I can't go very deep in this at all, but I think that one of the concepts is using transport layer security, TLS, on this. Maybe Mark, you know more about TLS than I do, but I think that's an encrypted.
Yeah, you'd be setting up basically a VPN tunnel for
Yeah.
how these things would be engineered.
I love these questions. This is really good.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions from our audience? Otherwise, Joe will take it away and wrap this thing up. Or if Mark or Michael, if you guys want to make any closing comments, you're more than welcome to do so as well.
I'll make a closing comment if I may. As I said in the onset here, these are one of those defining moments in our industry where a lot of things have been talked about in this regard, have been going on for years and years and years. And now I think we actually have a chance to put together industry government type of framework. I think it is going to unleash another generation of opportunity. I think it is what we strive to do, is to take full advantage of the technologies that we have and not get these kind of mixed hodgepodge type of intermediate things and getting this stuff worked out. So it's worth our time and attention. And, it's not necessarily easy, but I don't necessarily think it's hard. And I also think that it benefits everybody. So whether you're going to directly interconnect to the carrier, or you still want to work through a third party and how you connect to it, I think all boats in the harbor go up, and it's worth our time as an industry to help facilitate this.
Yeah, I think I think overall this is all good news for entities that are already IP enabled. I think we need to get TDM out of the network for lots of reasons. So I think that this is an overall positive. Be interesting to see how it plays out. And I would encourage you all to, if you're interested in this, just sort of keep an eye out on developments.
Can you hear me okay? Okay,
Yes.
great. Yeah, I can't get my video back up for some reason.
We see you.
But
we see you.
Oh, you do see me.
Yeah.
I don't see me. Okay. Well, everybody, Michael, Mark, thank you. It's unusual to have a regulatory webinar which talks about business opportunity. Usually, you regulating guys get on and you tell us about, some kind of tariff or some kind of tax or something that's going to cost us money. Here we're hearing about opportunity. And so I want to thank you guys for doing that, for kind of keeping your eyes open for business opportunities for service providers, as well as some of the bad stuff. I want to thank you for what you do. Mark and Mike, you guys spent a lot of time and energy on Cloud Communications Alliance and our regulatory posturing. So I want to thank you very much for that. Billy, great webinar. Everybody, thanks for joining us today. Remember, look at www.cloudcommunications.com for our event that's coming up in Almere, Netherlands. We invite you all to attend. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.